Chapter 1. The Porcelain Girl and the Shadow. Every town has that one girl. The one who looks like she was sculpted by an artist who is having the best day of his life. In our high school, that was Mary. She wasn't just pretty, she was radiant. She had this hair that caught the sunlight like spun gold, and eyes a deep, clear blue that made you feel like you were looking into a calm ocean. But the best thing about Mary? She didn't carry herself like she was better than anyone else. She was kind. She smiled at the nerds. She helped the teachers. And she moved through the chaotic, crowded hallways of St. Jude's High like a swan gliding through a swamp. And then there was Alucard. Talk about an edgy name, right? The guy looked exactly like what you'd expect with a name like that. He transferred in during the middle of the semester, and within 24 hours, he'd already established a permanent zone of absolute silence around himself. He was tall, thin, but broad-shouldered, with hair as black as a crow's wing that always fell slightly into his eyes. And those eyes, they weren't normal. They were a dark, intense gray, almost silver when the light hit them the right way. Alucard wore black sweaters, heavy boots, and a long, dark coat that the principal constantly tried to ban, though Alucard just ignored him. He never spoke unless called upon by a teacher, and even then, his voice was this incredibly deep, hypnotic baritone that made the room go completely still. He had this dark, heavy vibe radiating off him. It wasn't the vibe of a kid trying to be cool or rebellious. It was the vibe of an ancient, sleeping graveyard. Dangerous. Still. Mary and Alucard were total opposites, light and dark, day and night. But fate, or whatever cruel force runs this universe, loves a contrast. It started in AP Literature. They were paired up for a semester-long project on Gothic poetry. Mary, being the sweet soul she was, tried to make conversation on the first day they sat together at the back of the class. "Hi, Alucard," she said, offering that blinding $1,000,000 smile. "I guess we're partners. I'm Mary." Alucard didn't look at her at first. He just stared at the open textbook. But then, very slowly, he turned his head. His silver-gray eyes locked onto hers, and for a second, Mary told her best friend later, the air in the room felt 20 degrees colder, like a winter frost creeping up a window pane. "I know who you are, Mary," he said. His voice didn't have any malice in it, but it had a weight that made her breath hitch. "Oh, well, great," Mary stammered, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink. "Do you have any thoughts on Bram Stoker or Lord Byron? Which one should we focus on?" Alucard looked down at his own pale, long-fingered hands. Stoker gets too much credit. He turned a tragedy into a circus. That was it. That was all he said for the rest of the hour. But Mary? She couldn't stop looking at him. There was something buried beneath that terrifying, silent exterior that pulled at her. A strange, magnetic curiosity. Chapter 2. The Cracks in the Mask. Over the next few weeks, Mary started noticing things. Little details that didn't add up. She wasn't trying to spy on him, not initially. But when you're paired with someone who feels like a walking mystery, you tend to observe. First, it was the sun. St. Jude's had a beautiful, glass-roofed cafeteria where everyone loved to sit during lunch to catch the afternoon rays, except Alucard. He always sat in the absolute darkest corner beneath the shadow of a concrete pillar facing the door. One day, a group of rowdy athletes bumped into his table, knocking his backpack to the floor. As Alucard reached down to grab it, a stray beam of intense, direct sunlight hit the back of his bare hand. Mary was walking past at that exact moment. She swore she saw a faint, wispy wisp of smoke rise from his skin, and Alucard, "Sss," a sound so primal and feline it made her blood run cold. He ripped his hand back into the shadow, gripping his wrist. When she looked closer, his skin was angry and red, blistering instantly as if he'd touched a hot stove. But a high schooler doesn't just leap to monster. Mary assumed he had a severe allergy, a medical condition. She felt sorry for him. Then came the incident in the biology lab. They were doing blood typing labs, prickling their fingers with little lancets to test their blood against different serums. Mary was squeamish, tilting her head away as she pricked her finger. A neat, round bead of crimson blood formed on her fingertip. She turned to ask Alucard for a paper towel, but the words died in her throat. Alucard was staring at her hand. His pupils had dilated so wide, his eyes looked completely black. His jaw was clenched so tightly she could see the muscles pulsing in his cheek, and his lips were pulled back just enough to reveal sharp, elongated canines. Not plastic Halloween fangs. Real, gleaming ivory teeth that looked sharp enough to puncture leather. It was terrifying, yes, but there was an agonizing beauty in how fiercely he was fighting himself. "Alucard?" she whispered, freezing. He caught himself. In a fraction of a second, he blinked, his eyes returning to gray, his expression slamming shut like an iron vault. He stood up so fast his chair flipped backward, clattering against the linoleum floor. Without a word to the teacher, he walked out of the classroom, leaving a stunned, trembling Mary behind. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face as she typed in frantic search queries. Photosensitivity, elongated teeth, supernatural speed. Because that was another thing. She'd seen him cross the parking lot in the blink of an eye when he thought no one was looking. Every search result pointed to the same myth, the same legend. Vampire. She, in her empty bedroom. "No way," she muttered to herself. It's just a coincidence. He's just a goth guy with weird genetics." But deep down, in that quiet place where human instinct lives, Mary knew. Alucard wasn't a normal guy. He was something that belonged to the dark. Chapter 3. The Night the World Broke. But high school drama and supernatural suspicions don't mean a damn thing when real-world horror comes knocking on your door. Mary's father was a good man, too good for the city he worked in. He was a high-ranking city councilman who had spent the last year gathering evidence on a massive, deeply entrenched political syndicate that was bleeding the city dry. They were a ruthless gang of corrupt politicians, dirty cops, and corporate predators who wore expensive suits but carried the souls of butchers. Mary knew her dad was stressed. She'd seen him pacing the study late at night, whispering furiously into his phone. But she never imagined they would dare touch him. He was a public figure. He was protected. She was wrong. It happened on a rainy Tuesday night. Mary was up late in her second-floor bedroom, reading her lit textbook, trying to find some meaning in the poems she was supposed to analyze with Alucard. Downstairs, she heard the heavy thud of the front door being kicked open. Then came the shouting, men with gruff, violent voices. "Where's the drive, Thomas? Where are the files?" "Get away from my family," her father's voice roared, filled with a desperate, terrifying bravery. Mary froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She crept to her bedroom door, cracking it open. Down the hall, she heard her mother scream, a sharp, agonizing sound that cut through the dark. Then, the deafening, brutal, bang, bang, bang of a suppressed firearm. It was so fast, so horribly efficient. Mary's breath trapped in her throat. She wanted to run downstairs. She wanted to scream, to fight, to throw herself in front of them. But fear, pure, paralyzing, evolutionary fear, anchored her feet to the floor. Through the balustrade of the staircase, she saw 3 men in dark suits and tactical masks walking out of her father's study. One of them was holding a bloody briefcase. "Clean," one of the men muttered into a walkie-talkie. "The councilman and his wife are taken care of. Search the rest of the house for the girl." The girl. They were looking for her. Adrenaline finally broke her paralysis. Mary scrambled backward, slipping out of her bedroom window onto the slick roof of the porch. Rain lashed at her face, mixing with the hot tears pouring down her cheeks. She slid down the drainage pipe, scraping her hands raw, and fell into the wet bushes below. She ran. She didn't look back. She ran through the mud, through the dark alleys, crying, sobbing, her world completely shattered into a million bloody pieces. By the next morning, the news was everywhere. Tragic home invasion. Prominent councilman and wife murdered by unknown intruders. The police called it a robbery gone wrong, a random act of violence. But Mary knew the truth. It was a hit. A political execution. 2 days later, Mary was sitting in a small, secluded park near the school. She hadn't gone to class. She couldn't. She was staying with an aunt who lived across town, but she felt like a ghost walking in a living world. Her eyes were red, hollow, and dark circles stained her pale skin. Her best friend Sarah was sitting next to her, holding her hand, crying with her. "They're going to get away with it, Sarah," Mary choked out, her voice breaking, a ragged, miserable sound. "The police aren't even looking at the council. My dad had a list of names. It was the syndicate. It was Senator Vance, Judge Miller, and their enforcer, that monster Marcus. Everyone knows they run the city's underbelly. But they're too powerful. No one can touch them. They killed my mom and dad, and they're just going to walk free." Mary buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she wept. She didn't notice the shadow that fell over the bench. She didn't notice that the ambient noise of the park, the birds chirping, the distant rustle of traffic, had suddenly gone completely dead. Standing a few yards away, hidden beneath the deep shade of a weeping willow, was Alucard. He was standing perfectly still, his long black coat damp from the lingering mist. His silver eyes were fixed entirely on Mary. He had heard her. With his impossible, unnatural hearing, he had caught every single syllable, every drop of agony in her voice, every name that left her lips. His jaw tightened. A dark, terrifying aura expanded outward from him, so intense that Sarah suddenly shivered, looking around nervously. "Mary, do you feel that?" Sarah whispered, wiping her eyes. "It feels weird here. Let's go inside." Mary nodded listlessly, letting Sarah pull her up. As they walked away, Mary glanced back at the willow tree. It was empty. Alucard was gone. Chapter 4. The Harvest of Shadows. That night, a different kind of storm hit the city. Senator Vance was sitting in his high-rise penthouse, sipping a 20-year-old scotch. He was a heavy-set man with a smug, untouchable smile. Across from him sat Judge Miller and Marcus, the hulking, scarred enforcer who had personally pulled the trigger in Mary's home. They were celebrating. Thomas's files had been destroyed. The threat to their empire was gone. "To a clean slate," Vance said, raising his glass. Before Miller could clink his glass, the bulletproof glass of the penthouse window didn't just shatter. It exploded inward in a shower of deadly, glittering shards. A figure stepped through the ruined frame, silhouetted against the stormy night sky. It was Alucard. But he didn't look like the silent high school boy anymore. The air around him hummed with an ancient, oppressive power. His long coat billowed like the wings of a giant bat. His eyes were no longer gray. They were burning, malevolent pools of crimson, glowing like hot coals in the dark. His fangs were fully bared, gleaming with a predatory hunger. Marcus, a seasoned killer, didn't hesitate. He pulled his heavy-caliber pistol and emptied the magazine directly into Alucard's chest. The deafening cracks echoed through the penthouse. Alucard didn't even flinch. The bullets hit his chest, flattened, and dropped uselessly to the floor like pebbles. The entry wounds sealed up instantly, the flesh knitting back together in a heartbeat. Marcus gasped, dropping his gun. What the hell are you?" Alucard didn't answer with words. He moved. To the human eye, it wasn't running. It was teleportation. A flash of black shadow. The next second, Alucard was standing directly in front of Marcus. He reached out with one pale hand, gripping the massive enforcer by the throat, and lifted him off the ground as if he weighed nothing at all. "You touched something sacred," Alucard whispered. His voice didn't sound human anymore. It echoed with the resonance of 1,000 dead souls screaming in an abyss. "And for that, your blood belongs to the earth." With a sickening crunch, Alucard crushed the man's windpipe, throwing his lifeless body across the room like a broken doll. Judge Miller shrieked, scrambling backward on his hands and knees, trying to reach the door. Alucard didn't even look at him. He merely flicked his wrist, and a burst of invisible concussive force slammed Miller against the marble wall, snapping his spine instantly. Now, only Senator Vance was left. The politician was shaking violently, wetness pooling around his expensive trousers as he backed away until his spine hit the bar. "Please," Vance banged, holding his hands up. "I have money. Millions. Whoever hired you, I'll double it. Just tell me who you are." Alucard walked toward him slowly, his heavy boots clicking rhythmically against the blood-stained hardwood. The crimson glow in his eyes flared, casting a demonic light across his pale, aristocratic features. "I am the dark that watches the night,"
Alucard said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft purr. "And I am the executioner of those who make her cry." Vance didn't even have time to scream before the shadows in the room rose up, swallowing him whole.
Chapter 5. The Discovery. The next morning, the city woke up to a massacre. The news anchor on the television was pale, her voice trembling as she read the breaking report. A horrific scene at the penthouse of Senator Vance. The senator, Judge Miller, and an associate were found brutally murdered. Police sources described the scene as a slaughterhouse, stating the injuries were inconsistent with any known weapon. Mary sat in her aunt's living room, staring blankly at the screen. Sarah's words from the day before echoed in her mind. Senator Vance, Judge Miller, Marcus. The exact names she had whispered in the park. The exact men responsible for her parents' deaths. All dead in a single night. A normal person would feel relieved, maybe even happy. But Mary felt a cold, sharp dread settle deep in her stomach. Inconsistent with any known weapon. She remembered the park. She remembered the sudden, unnatural drop in temperature. She remembered the shadow under the willow tree. And she remembered the biology lab, the sharp teeth, the crimson hunger in Alucard's eyes. Could a monster be a savior? She knew. She didn't have proof. She didn't have a confession. But she knew in her soul who had done this. He had done it for her. Mary stood up, her jaw setting with a newfound, desperate courage. She didn't go to her aunt's car. She didn't call the police. She walked out of the house and headed straight toward the one place she knew he would be if he was still in this city. The old, abandoned Gothic church at the edge of town. A place shrouded in ivy and forgotten by time, where Alucard was rumored to live. Chapter 6. The King of the Night. The church was massive, its stone walls crumbling, its stained glass windows broken and jagged like teeth against the gray afternoon sky. The heavy oak doors were rotted, hanging loosely on their hinges. Mary pushed them open. The interior was vast, filled with shadows and the musty smell of ancient dust and damp stone. A single shaft of pale daylight cut through the ruined roof, illuminating the broken altar at the far end of the nave. Standing right at the edge of that light, just inside the deep, devouring darkness, was Alucard. He didn't have his school backpack. He wasn't wearing the St. Jude's uniform. He wore a long, flowing crimson vest beneath his black trench coat, looking every bit like a displaced prince from another century. His back was turned to her. "You shouldn't have come here, Mary," he said. His voice echoed through the empty cavern of the church, smooth, deep, and heavy with a profound sadness. Mary took a deep breath, clutching her hands together to stop them from shaking. She walked down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing against the stone floor. She stopped just 10 feet away from him. "It was you," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "The penthouse last night. You killed them." Alucard didn't deny it. He didn't move. "They were monsters. They took what was precious to you. They deserved to bleed." "Who are you, Alucard?" Mary asked, stepping closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. She needed to hear it. She needed the truth. I know you're not a normal guy. I've seen the things you do. I know what you are. You're a vampire." Finally, Alucard turned around. When Mary saw his face, she gasped. The high school boy was entirely gone. His features were sharper, more aristocratic, terrifyingly beautiful, but cast in an aura of absolute majesty and power. His eyes were a burning, molten silver red, and the sheer weight of his presence made it hard for her to breathe. "A vampire," Alucard whispered, a bitter, haunting smile touching his lips. It was a sound of a man who had lived 1,000 lifetimes of sorrow. "Yes, I suppose that is the word your modern world uses." He stepped out of the shadow, just an inch into the pale light. The skin of his face flared with tiny, glittering sparks, but he ignored the pain, staring directly into her blue eyes. "But I am not an ordinary vampire, Mary," he said, his voice dropping to a tone of pure, ancient reverence. "My true name is Vlad Dracula, the Lord of the Shadows, the first of my kind." Mary's eyes widened. Dracula, the myth, the king of vampires. He was standing right in front of her, in a broken church in a modern city. "Why?" Mary whispered, tears finally welling up in her eyes. "Why did you do it for me? You don't even know me. We were just lit partners. Why risk everything to avenge my parents?" Alucard looked at her, and the terrifying demonic aura around him instantly evaporated, replaced by a gaze so filled with tender, agonized love that it broke Mary's heart. He reached out a pale, trembling hand, stopping just short of touching her cheek, as if he feared his cold skin would break her porcelain beauty. "Because I do know you, Mary," Alucard said, his voice soft, trembling with an emotion that had burned for centuries. It was a love so deep it felt older than the stars themselves. "I have known you for 1,000 years." Mary blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek. What do you mean?" "We are bound, you and I," Alucard whispered, a heartbreaking smile on his lips. "In every timeline, in every universe, in every cycle of this wretched world, I find you. Sometimes you are a princess, sometimes you are a peasant, and sometimes you are a beautiful girl in a crowded high school. But no matter where we are or who we are, I love you. I have loved you in every life I have lived, and I will love you until the sun burns out and the universe crumbles into ash." Mary stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. Suddenly, memories she didn't understand, flashes of ancient castles, of ballroom dances under candlelight, of dying in his arms while a war raged outside, flooded her mind like a dam breaking. She felt it, the ancient cosmic pull between their souls. "Alucard," she whispered, reaching out to finally grasp his hand. "But this world is too cruel for us right now," Alucard said softly, his eyes shining with a final, devastating tenderness. "The monsters of this city will look for who destroyed their leaders. If I stay near you, they will find you. I had to protect you, Mary. That is my purpose. That is my curse." "No, wait," Mary cried, stepping forward. "Don't leave me." "I am always with you, my love," Alucard whispered. "In the dark, in the shadows, I am always watching." Before her fingers could brush against his skin, a sudden, violent gust of wind whipped through the ruined church, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and dead leaves. Mary shielded her eyes, crying out his name into the roaring wind. "Alucard!" And then, as quickly as it had started, the wind stopped. The church went dead silent. The dust settled slowly in the pale shafts of afternoon light. Mary lowered her arms and opened her eyes. The space in front of her was completely empty. Alucard was gone. There was no trace of him, no footprints in the dust, nothing but a single, perfectly preserved black rose lying on the broken stone altar where he had just stood. Mary picked up that rose, you know. She kept it for the rest of her life. It never withered. It never lost its scent. And every time she walked past a dark alley or looked out her window into the deep, black night, she didn't feel afraid anymore. Because she knew that somewhere out there, lurking in the shadows of this universe and the next, the king of the vampires was watching over her. And he always would.